Imagine walking through Paris, sitting in a cafe in Madrid, or chatting with a friend in Berlin, and your AirPods instantly translating your conversation in real time. Sounds pretty futuristic, right? Well, this week Apple launched a live translation feature for its newest AirPods. But there's one catch. In the European Union, it's blocked. Why? That's exactly what we're diving into today. At its recent event, Apple introduced AirPods Pro 3, along with a key new feature, live translation. This isn't just transcription, it's real-time speech translation using the AirPods and paired iPhone. If both people have compatible AirPods, the earbuds will pick up speech, suppress the other speaker's volume via noise cancellation, and deliver a translation while keeping the flow of conversation natural. The feature will work back to older supported models too, AirPods Pro 2 and AirPods 4 with active noise cancellation, so long as the user has an iPhone that supports Apple Intelligence and is running iOS 26. Here's the deal. If you're in the EU and your Apple account is registered in an EU country, you can't use live translation with AirPods. That's Apple's own note. So even if you have the right hardware, AirPods Pro 3, Pro 2, or AirPods 4, and the correct iPhone, the feature won't be enabled for you if both your physical location and your Apple ID region are inside the EU. Now, what's causing Apple to hold back this feature in the EU? Reports in Apple's own statements point to regulatory constraints. Let's break those down. Digital Markets Act, DMA. The DMA is an EU regulation aimed at ensuring fair competition. Among other things, it mandates that major tech platforms provide certain interoperability with third-party devices or services so that they don't unfairly favor their own hardware or services. Live translation, especially being tied to Apple's own earbuds, could be interpreted as a feature giving Apple hardware an exclusive advantage. Data and privacy laws, GDPR, possibly the new AI Act. Live translation deals with speech data in real time, which is sensitive. EU laws like GDPR dictate how data must be collected, processed, stored, and AI-related regulation is tightening. Apple seems to be cautious about launching before full compliance is confirmed. Regulatory certainty and testing. Apple may require more time to ensure transparency, privacy protections, and that its implementation aligns with EU rules so it doesn't run into legal trouble or risk fines. The EU enforcement landscape for digital regulation has been increasingly active. Apple explicitly stated in its communications that the block is tied to the DMA interoperability requirements, and said that, in their view, other laws like data protection or privacy were not the factor in its decision to block at this stage. To understand what's at stake, let's look at what live translation delivers. If only one party has compatible AirPods, iPhone setup, your speech gets translated and shown on your iPhone screen, while the other person hears you. If both participants are using compatible AirPods with the feature enabled, the earbuds handle the translation more fluidly. Noise cancellation helps suppress the ambient or direct voice so translations are clearer. Supported languages at launch include English, US and UK, French, German, Brazilian Portuguese, and Spanish. Apple has also said additional languages, Italian, Japanese, Korean, and simplified Chinese, will be added later. So what does this mean for EU users, and for Apple's broader strategy? For EU users, they lose access at launch. Even travelers inside the EU or EU account holders will be unable to access a feature that many outside the EU will get immediately. This creates a clear regional disparity. For Apple, the company is getting pressure from regulators over competition and fairness. This block may be an attempt to preempt regulatory enforcement, or to avoid getting penalized under DMA rules. But it also opens Apple to criticism for delaying features for Europeans. For competitors and markets, other companies offering translation tools or earbuds with translation may gain an edge in the EU during this window. Also, this signals how powerful EU regulations have become in shaping what features get released, and where. Let's zoom into a couple of relevant pieces of EU legislation. Digital Markets Act, DMA. The DMA is designed to ensure that gatekeeper platforms, companies with large market power like Apple, don't unfairly prefer their own hardware, services, or apps. If a feature is tied exclusively to Apple's hardware and the OS, regulators could require Apple to open up access, ensure third parties have equivalent possibilities, or delay rollout until compliance. General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Speech is personal data. Live translation will involve capturing local conversations, possibly sending data to servers, processing it. These are all heavily regulated under GDPR. Apple has claimed data protection laws are not the main reason for this delay, but they likely remain part of the background concerns. EU AI Act, in process. As the EU works to regulate AI, features like real-time translation, especially with machine learning, AI models, live inference, will face scrutiny for transparency, bias, clarity of data usage, and user control. Beyond the regulations, this is about user experience and principles of fairness. Feature availability depends on location and account region. That means even someone who buys the hardware overseas or travels could still be blocked by having an EU Apple ID. It's not just about where you are physically, but what account region you have. Delay in adoption and trust concerns. Users might feel left out, or that regulation is stifling innovation, or simply frustrated by delayed access. Apple has a history of similar delays for EU rollouts of some services. Competitive implications. Rivals might use this as a marketing point. Companies that can build translation earbuds or cross-platform translation that work in the EU might attract users who are disappointed by Apple's limitations. There are still several open questions. When exactly will the feature roll out in the EU? Apple hasn't given a timeline. Will Apple modify the feature so it complies with DMA, AI Act, or regulations, or is it waiting on regulatory clarity? What changes might be required? Interoperability, being forced to open the feature to third-party devices. Transparency around how speech data is processed, local data storage, etc. Whether users with non-EU Apple accounts or those traveling outside the EU will be able to use the feature somehow. Apple has clarified that while privacy laws like GDPR and AI regulation are relevant in general, the reason they are citing for withholding live translation in the EU right now is primarily Digital Markets Act interoperability requirements. They've said that other legal requirements, such as data protection, were not a factor in its decision at this stage. That might mean they believe the current setup breaches DMA rules, or may in future, and so they opt to wait until they can meet those requirements properly across the EU. Let's compare what's happening elsewhere. In regions outside the EU, the feature is launching with full functionality, along with the hardware and supporting iPhone, firmware, etc. Language support is limited at first but expected to grow. Apple has in the past delayed or withheld certain AI features or services in the EU because of regulatory scrutiny, but eventually released them once compliance was achieved. Competing products. Some earbuds or translation devices already operate in the EU. They may have different privacy standards, language selections, or ways of processing data. For some users, those may become viable alternatives, especially if Apple's delays persist. If you're in the EU and waiting on this feature, here are some options. Keep your hardware and software up to date, AirPods firmware and iOS 26, so that once Apple enables the feature, you're ready. Monitor Apple's region settings, Apple ID region. In some cases there might be workarounds, though these could violate terms of service or create other risks. Look for third-party accessories or translation earbuds that already offer real-time translation and are compliant in the EU. Feedback and pressure matter. Let Apple know users want this feature. Let EU regulators know citizens are concerned about harmonizing rights and access. This case is a microcosm of larger trends, balancing privacy, competition, and innovation. EU regulators are increasingly willing to enforce rules that shape what features tech companies can or cannot offer, in the name of fairness, competition, and user privacy. Feature fragmentation. Users in different regions often get different capabilities, and in the age of global connectivity, that friction becomes more noticeable. Corporate strategy shifts. Companies like Apple may now plan feature rollouts with regulatory compliance in mind from day one, especially in the EU. Here's my take. Apple's decision to block live translation in the EU isn't purely about holding back innovation. It's about making sure the tech lives up to legal, ethical, and regulatory obligations. That said, from a user standpoint, it feels unfair, especially since the hardware is already being sold, and the promise of this feature is part of the pitch. For now, EU users are waiting, and observers will be watching to see how quickly Apple can adapt its tech to meet EU rules. If they succeed, live translation could become a powerful region-wide feature. If not, Apple might need to rethink how it designs these features for global markets. What do you think? Should companies delay launches in regions until regulation is satisfied or push through with limited versions? Are the rules in the EU too strict, or just right? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this breakdown, hit subscribe so you stay up to speed with tech, regulation, and innovation colliding around the world.